At 9:04 on a December morning, every clock within reach of Halifax Harbor stopped at the same instant. Wristwatches on dock workers, mantel clocks in kitchen windows, the tower clock above the rail yards, all frozen on the same minute, as though the city itself had taken a single blow to the chest. For years, this detail was treated as folklore, too neat to be real. But the timestamp checks out, confirmed across dozens of separate households that had no way of coordinating with one another. Something had struck Halifax hard enough and fast enough to leave an identical scar on clocks scattered across an entire city. Whatever caused that needs an explanation, because on paper, what triggered it was almost embarrassingly small. Two ships moving at walking pace in a channel not much wider than the boats themselves. That channel was called the Narrows, the bottleneck through which every vessel entering or leaving Halifax Harbor had to pass. By December of 1917, wartime traffic had turned it into one of the busiest, most congested stretches of water in North America. Troop transports, supply ships, and cargo vessels queued for entry, all funneled through a passage barely built for peacetime shipping, let alone a war economy running at full tilt. Into that bottleneck, on the morning of December 6th, came two ships heading in opposite directions. The French cargo vessel Mont-Blanc, inbound and low in the water, and the Norwegian steamer Imo, outbound and already behind its own schedule. Neither ship was unusual. Neither captain was reckless by the standards of the day. What made the morning different was what the Mont-Blanc was carrying, and how badly that fact had been kept secret. The Mont-Blanc had left port fully loaded with wartime explosives, the kind of cargo that, under normal harbor rules, should have moved with warning flags, an armed escort, and priority right-of-way through a channel like the Narrows. It carried almost none of that. No distinguishing markings announced what sat in its hull. No naval escort cleared its path. Nothing told the Imo or anyone else on the water that morning that this was not an ordinary freighter. To every other captain in the harbor, it looked like just another slow, overloaded cargo ship easing toward the docks. The collision itself, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. The two ships misjudged which side of the channel each would take, a routine signaling misunderstanding, the kind that happened in busy harbors more often than anyone liked to admit. The Imo reversed engines too late. Its bow caught the Mont-Blanc on the starboard side, at a speed so low that neither crew initially thought much of it. There was no dramatic tearing of hulls, no rush of water, just a scrape, a shudder, and sparks. Those sparks found something the Imo's crew could not have known was there. The impact ignited barrels of fuel stored on the Mont-Blanc's deck, and within minutes the ship was burning. Its own crew, who understood exactly what sat in the holds beneath that fire, did the only thing that made sense to them. They abandoned ship immediately, rowing hard for the Halifax shoreline, shouting warnings that few onshore could understand over the noise, in a language most dock workers didn't speak. The burning, drifting Mont-Blanc, now unmanned, floated toward the Halifax docks on its own, drawing a crowd. Word spread that a ship was on fire in the harbor, and Richmond's residents did what people do when something dramatic happens nearby. They came to the windows, they came to the docks, they gathered to watch a spectacle they had no way of understanding. At 9:04 that morning, the Mont-Blanc detonated. What followed was, at the time, the largest explosion ever caused by human hands, a title it would hold until an American bomber released a very different kind of weapon over Japan nearly 3 decades later. The blast leveled the Richmond district almost entirely, flattening homes, schools, and factories in a single shockwave. Roughly 1,900 to 2,000 people were killed outright, and about 9,000 more were injured, many of them the very onlookers who had gathered at their windows to watch the fire, their faces turned toward the glass the instant it shattered inward. That still doesn't fully explain how something this catastrophic could come from a mistake this ordinary. A signaling error happens in busy harbors constantly. Ships scrape each other, sparks fly, fires start and get contained. For that mundane failure to escalate into the destruction of a city, something else had to be true. And that's where the story of Halifax stops being about two ships and starts being about the systems that put them there in the first place. In the weeks after the explosion, a judicial inquiry opened under Judge Arthur Drysdale, tasked with assigning blame for the collision. The Wreck Commission's initial findings pointed squarely at the Mont-Blanc. Its captain and the harbor pilot aboard it were found responsible, a verdict that closed the case tidily around 2 men and their decisions in the Narrows that morning. But that verdict didn't survive scrutiny for long. On appeal, the finding was contested and ultimately overturned, with responsibility for the collision found to lie with both vessels rather than one. The tidy story, one captain's bad call, turned out to be wrong. What the appeal exposed, even if it didn't say so outright, was a wartime shipping system that had let an explosives-laden ship move through a crowded civilian channel with none of the safeguards such cargo demanded. No mandatory escort, no clear signage, no enforced priority. The Mont-Blanc wasn't sunk by sabotage or freak weather. It was undone by an infrastructure that treated a floating bomb like any other cargo ship, in a harbor too busy and too poorly coordinated to catch the difference before it mattered. The aftermath tested Halifax as much as the blast itself. Rescue efforts, already overwhelmed by the scale of the wounded and the collapsed buildings, were further crippled the very next day by a blizzard that buried the wreckage of Richmond under snow, slowing recovery for people still trapped beneath the debris. The city that had, minutes earlier, been a functioning wartime port was now a landscape of rubble, snow, and silence, its clocks all agreeing on the exact second everything changed. That's the answer to the question the stopped clocks posed. Halifax wasn't destroyed by an act of war, or an act of malice, or even a wildly improbable accident. It was destroyed by a routine navigational mistake, in a channel too narrow for error, carrying cargo that should never have been allowed to make that mistake unsupervised. The tragedy wasn't that something extraordinary went wrong. It's that something completely ordinary did, and nobody in the chain of command had built in enough margin to survive it. Halifax matters now for the same reason it later unsettled the scientists studying nuclear weapons. It was proof, years before Hiroshima, that human beings had already built the capacity to erase a city not through a single act of intention, but through an accumulation of small, forgivable mistakes, a missed signal, an unescorted ship, a curious crowd at a window. The clocks in Halifax's museum still show 9:04. They don't stop to commemorate an explosion. They stop to remind visitors that catastrophe, at that scale, doesn't always require a villain. Sometimes it only requires a system willing to let 2 ordinary ships meet in a channel with no room left for mistakes.